Hi everyone, and welcome to my retrospective on Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. Just a disclaimer before we begin, I don't own any rights to Lois and Clark or Superman. I've pieced this together purely as a fan of the show in some of my downtime as a hobby. Any ad revenue raised during this video goes to the copyright holder. I'd also like to mention that this is a fairly in-depth look at Lois and Clark, and so there will be some spoilers as we go along. I hope you enjoy this next hour as we have a look at the 1990s incarnation of the Man of Steel. So let's get stuck into it. Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman aired from late 1993 until mid-1997, having a 4-season run. Although it's quite an old show today, it was titled The New Adventures of Superman at the time, as it was the first time the Man of Steel had been in an episodic television role since George Reeves wore the tights and cape in The Adventures of Superman in the 1950s, not including the Superboy series which wrapped in 1992. And this was the final live-action version of Superman for the 20th century. As someone who was born in 1990, Dean Cain was the first Man of Steel of my time. Lois and Clark was my introduction to Superman on screen. I started watching it halfway through the final season of its original run and really enjoyed it. I didn't become a huge Superman fan until my dad rented the Christopher Reeve films for me on VHS as it was in those days. But Lois and Clark was certainly my initial introduction to the Superman universe. Once Lois and Clark's initial run ended, I would always make sure to catch the reruns on TV, and I was very quick to purchase the DVDs when they were released in 2006, the year that Superman returned. To put Lois and Clark's age into perspective, 1993 was also the year that Frasier began its run on television, with Kelsey Grammer still rocking that receding mullet, and was 1 year before Warner Brothers' two big hits of the 1990s, Friends and ER, started beaming into our television sets in 1994. In the world of cinema, this was the year that Jurassic Park, Mrs. Doubtfire, and Philadelphia were released on the big screen. So, in perspective to the television world of superheroes, this is a long time ago now. Well, way before today's DC shows such as Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl, Superman and Lois, or even Smallville were even thought about. And when you consider that Lois and Clark's beginning came only 6 years after Christopher Reeve's final Superman appearance in 1987's Superman 4, it makes you realize just how far the world of television and comic book characters have come in the last 25 years, and that Lois and Clark was indeed strong enough to stand the test of time. When Deborah Joy Levine was approached for a new Superman series for television, Deborah was more interested in the idea of writing a romantic comedy called Lois and Clark rather than a Superman action series. With this direction in place from the start, the decision was made to put the emphasis on the character of Clark Kent and his relationship with Lois Lane, instead of on Superman. This was a very different approach to what we had seen before or since. When we look at other interpretations of Superman, such as from Henry Cavill and Christopher Reeve, Superman is the main, true character, and Clark Kent is the disguise or the act. With Lois and Clark, it was made clear from day one that this interpretation of Clark Kent was the main character, and Superman was simply his disguise so he could use his superpowers to help the world while still being able to maintain a normal, everyday life. Although Clark Kent does have top billing in the show, he and Lois are complete equals, and at times, you could swear that the main character of the series was in fact Lois Lane, making the genre of the show just as much a guy-girl romance series as a superhero series, if not more so. Season 1 of Lois and Clark begins with a double-length pilot episode in which an eager Clark Kent comes to Metropolis seeking employment as a reporter for the Daily Planet. During his interview with editor Perry White, Clark first meets Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane, and from the moment that he sees Lois, Clark can't deny his attraction towards her. Although initially turned down, Clark is able to persuade Perry to hire him when he takes the initiative to write a newspaper story about the erasing of an old theatre that he overheard Lois had passed up while in his interview. Much to Lois's dismay and Clark's delight, it doesn't take Perry long to pair the two of them to work on a story about the possibility of sabotage of a new space program. Lois really resents having to work with Clark, stating that she didn't work her buns off to become a reporter just to babysit a hack from Nowheresville. While learning to live life in the busy city environment, Clark comes across several life-threatening scenarios on the metropolitan streets for which he must use his superpowers to come to the rescue as discreetly as possible. News of this really agitates Clark's father, Jonathan, who continually reminds Clark that the city is too busy to be using his superpowers, and that once somebody sees him, they will put him in a laboratory and dissect him like a frog. Knowing that he will not be able to help but help in future situations, Clark asks his mother, Martha, to get out her old sewing machine and create a costume for him that he can wear as a disguise while saving the day. Martha, being the loving mother that she is, agrees, and after several failed attempts, she and Clark finally agree on the blue, red, and yellow suit that we all know and love. Clark's first appearance as Superman has him single-handedly stopping the sabotage of the space program, and personally flies the spacecraft to the station safely. Superman then pays a visit to Lex Luthor and informs him that he is aware that it was Lex who is behind the sabotage for his own financial gain. Of course, this is because the assertive and intellectual Clark Kent was able to see through Lex's facade during an earlier meeting. Lois is completely taken with Superman, reversing the situation between Clark and Lois and setting up the famous love triangle with two people that would become the basis for the entire series. Clark Kent and Superman are played by Dean Cain, who does a great job in the dual role. He is charming, really well built for a 90s TV star, and is athletic enough to do the tights justice. At 5 feet 11 inches tall, Dean Cain is the shortest live-action Superman to date, putting him almost half a foot below the tallest, Christopher Reeve, at 6'4". In the comics, Superman is billed at 6'3", so Dean Cain is quite short for Superman, and at times it's obvious that he is looking up significantly into the eyes of the villains, which can look kind of funny. Facially, he doesn't resemble the comic book Superman as much as Christopher Reeve and Brandon Routh did, but in his own way he's able to bring the dual roles to life convincingly. Dean's portrayal of Superman is quite similar in style to Christopher Reeve's, which is impressive enough in itself. But for me, it's Dean's portrayal of Clark Kent that made him the right man for the job. Unlike Reeve's bumbling, geeky Clark Kent, Dean's Clark is assertive, confident, mild-mannered, but also knows how to stand up for himself. And I think, at times, Dean's Clark is an even more desirable character than his Superman. Lois Lane is portrayed by Terry Hatcher, who is nothing short of amazing in the role. Lois is a strong and independent working woman of the 90s, and Terry captures this perfectly. She is confident, stubborn, determined, and aggressive, while at the same time incredibly sexy. She is still put in the position of the damsel in distress quite a bit so that Superman can do his thing, but it's not because she's a helpless little lady who needs a man to come and rescue her, but it's because she refuses to wait for somebody else to get there first and takes it upon herself to play her part in getting the job done, which at times is the wrong choice. But leaping before she looks is what makes Lois Lane, and it's what drives Clark crazy, while at the same time makes him fall more and more in love with her each and every week. Terry is my favourite Lois Lane to date. I'm a big fan of Erica Durance as well, but to me, Terry Hatcher has always been Lois Lane. Perry White is played by the late Lane Smith, and just like Terry Hatcher as Lois, Lane is my favourite Perry to date. He really brought his southern background to the role and made it something very special, which we haven't really seen before or since. Lane walks the line of the newsroom editor-in-chief perfectly. He can be very stern when he needs to be, but he can also be a very warm, loving and generous man to his work family when required. Perry is a passionate Elvis fan, and in one episode does an Elvis impersonation. He always throws references to Elvis into his pep talks, and his catchphrase is, "Great Shades of Elvis," a play on former Perry White John Hamilton's Great Caesar's Ghost. There are several episodes along the way where for one reason or another, Perry's personality is altered through some kind of potion or something. and it is hysterical. You can tell just by watching that Lane had a ball shooting these episodes, and I don't think we will ever have another Perry White like him again. Michael Landers plays young copy boy and aspiring photographer Jimmy Olsen. Michael is great as Jimmy. He really brings the naivete of the young hopeful to life, while at the same time proves to be an asset for the Daily Planet. Michael was only 20 years old when he started playing Jimmy and has no problem bringing the character to life. I don't have much else to say about Michael Landers, and I'll explain why a bit later, but he did a fine job in the role. Tracy Scoggins plays Daily Planet gossip columnist Catherine Cat Grant. Unlike Lois, who puts her work before her social life, Kat's work is her social life. She lives a very different lifestyle to Lois, one of parties and various men. This makes her not very liked by Lois, which Kat knows all too well, and therefore it's very easy for Kat to get under Lois's skin, as she does on numerous occasions. Unlike Lois, Kat is attracted to Clark right away and makes various attempts to woo him throughout season 1. And while she's a very attractive woman, Clark is a one-woman man, and I guess because he has a big secret on his shoulders and because he has his eye on Lois, he doesn't rush to get into bed with anyone. A man of steel and a will of iron, you might say. To my knowledge, this is the first live-action appearance of Cat Grant in the Superman universe. I know she's popped up since in both Smallville and Supergirl, but as far as I'm aware, Lois and Clark's Cat Grant was the first. Kay Callan plays Martha Kent and is everything a loving mother of the 90s should be. She would do anything for Clark, from making and repairing his costume on several occasions to offering him honest and harsh advice about his decisions regarding Lois. Martha is a constant motherly beacon of support for Clark and is one of 2 main reasons why he has grown up to become the great man that he is. Martha also becomes somewhat of a mother figure to Lois, as Lois was not blessed with the same family unit that Clark was. Martha generously sits down to numerous girl talks with Lois throughout the series and realizes what Clark sees in her from the get-go. The late Eddie Jones brings Jonathan Kent to life, and it's clear from the start that he is the other main reason why Clark has become such a great man. He is the kind of father figure that any young man would be lucky to have. He's always there to offer man-to-man support and advice to Clark, both as a human being and as a superhero, something that no other man can do, while at the same time can be very no-nonsense and to the point when needed. He is very concerned that the world will discover Clark's secret and is also very concerned whenever Clark is in any kind of trouble. Jonathan and Martha are the kind of parents that anyone would be proud to call mum and dad, and really make you realize how lucky the world is that such a powerful being was raised by such wonderful people. Superman's arch-nemesis Lex Luthor is played by veteran TV actor John Shea. John brought a more modern approach to the role of Lex Luthor at the time. Lex was no longer a quirky, mad scientist type of character that we'd seen in the past from the likes of Gene Hackman and even earlier than that, but he was now a rich and powerful business tycoon with the world at his fingertips. He is both striking and charming, and unlike in the past, this Lex Luthor has a full head of hair. I guess when you're one of the wealthiest men in the world, you'll find a way to have as much hair as you want. John Shea based his Lex Luthor on the premise that because he's been so untouchable for so long and has everything at his disposal, he is in fact empty and bored out of his mind. When Superman shows up, there is a part of Lex that is delighted because he finally has a worthy adversary who is powerful enough to challenge him. Finally, he says, "Let the games begin." John's Lex Luthor is a real breath of fresh air, and he does a great job in bringing Superman's arch-nemesis to life. As Season 1 of Lois and Clark proceeds, the formula is pretty simple. Each week we are introduced to a new villain that Lois and Clark must uncover with their investigative reporting, and then Superman must show up to assist in the villain's comeuppance. Clark is able to work out that most of the villains are having their strings pulled by Lex Luthor. However, Lex is rich, powerful and resourceful, and knows how to cover his tracks. Like Clark, Lex was also taken with Lois from the first time they met, and as the season goes on, Lex admits that he has in fact fallen in love with Lois. Using his wit, power and charm, Lex proposes to Lois, which causes a rift between Lois and Clark. After hatching an elaborate plan to destroy the Daily Planet, Lex intends to take Lois away from her old life, and when Superman tells Lois that he can never be with her, she agrees to marry Lex, leaving Clark devastated. My top 3 episodes for Season 1 would have to be Episode 6, I've Got a Crush on You, where Lois and Clark investigate corruption at the Metro Club and the link between the club and a group of arsonists called the Toasters. The episode is great fun and really demonstrates the competitive nature of Lois Lane in the world of journalism and how far she is willing to go to get that Pulitzer. The episode also features Terry Hatcher's amazing performance of I've Got a Crush on You and perfectly demonstrates her vocal talents as well as her acting talent. Episode 8, The Green Glow of Home, where Clark has his first encounter with kryptonite, and for the first time has to take on a villain as flesh and blood. I really enjoy this episode because it takes place in Smallville as opposed to Metropolis, which is refreshing. And so Lois, having been a city slicker her whole life, struggles to see the positive side of life in the country. As the episode goes on, Lois begins to adapt to the country life and finds a new appreciation for Clark and his background. We are also shown a clear demonstration of the value that Clark has for human life. And episode 17, The Rival, where Lois's former best friend and now rival, Linda King, comes to Metropolis as a reporter for the Daily Planet's rival, the Metropolis Star. When Linda continually ends up in just the right place at just the right time to be able to scoop the Daily Planet's reporters out of the hottest stories in town, Lois and Clark suspect foul play. However, when Lois gets jealous over the amount of attention that Clark is giving Linda, she tells Clark that he should go and work with her instead, to which Clark responds, "Maybe I just will," and sure enough, takes a job at the Star. Or does he? Season 2 brings some cast changes. John Shea leaves the main cast lineup and only returns as a guest star in Seasons 2 and 3. Tracy Scoggins is also removed from the main cast, and we never see or hear from or about Cat Grant again after Season 1. While there was a time and place for Lois and Cat's catfight moments, they never really served any real purpose to the narrative of the episodes and the show in general. I do feel that the character Cat Grant had become more or less redundant by Season 2. Whether or not that was the reason why Tracy never returned, I don't know. But I feel that Cat Grant had served her purpose by the end of Season 1. Last but not least, we have a new Jimmy Olsen, as Justin Whalen takes over the role from Michael Landers and will continue to play the role of Jimmy for the rest of the series. It's been said that Jimmy was recast because they felt that Michael Landers resembled Dean Cain too much, and while I can see where they were coming from, I'm not sure why they didn't consider that from the get-go. But anyway, for me, Justin is the Jimmy Olsen that I associate Lois and Clark with. As I've mentioned before, my first exposure to Lois and Clark was during Season 4, and so Justin was the first Jimmy I saw in the show. I totally understand why fans who watch the show from the start will always favour Michael Landers, but for me, Jimmy is indeed Justin Whalen. Over the 3 seasons that Justin was in the role, he had a lot more time to shine than what Michael had. We are able to see more layers with Jimmy from Seasons 2 to 4, as we are introduced to several of his lady friends and even his father in one episode. This is something that we never got in Season 1, and this is why I don't have much to say on Michael Landers' interpretation in the role. We also see personal growth within Jimmy as he gains more confidence in the newsroom environment and becomes a lot more involved in assisting Lois and Clark investigate. This new cast lineup of Dean, Terry, Lane, Justin, Kay, and Eddie would remain right up until the show's conclusion. There was also a change in the show's producer element, as Deborah Joy Levine was replaced by Robert Singer as the main executive producer. Robert wanted to take the show down a slightly different path by incorporating more of the elements from the Superman comics into the episodes. Season 2 is my personal favourite. A lot of Lois and Clark fans prefer Season 1, but for me, I really do feel that Season 2 was the strongest season out of the 4. As great as Season 1 was in setting everything up, Season 2 really begins to expand on those character relationships and flesh out what was brought to us in Season 1. Lois and Clark's relationship grows considerably throughout Season 2, and while Lois is still hopeful that Superman can be the man for her, she really does start to favour Clark as the season progresses. Their relationship is not without its bumps, however, as both Lois and Clark are admired by and consider being with other people. Mason Drake for Clark, a Metropolis police officer who really dislikes Superman, and Dan Scardino for Lois, a detective for the DEA who charms Lois while getting under the skin of both Clark and Superman. As Lois and Clark begin spending more time together, Clark has to come up with different excuses as to why he needs to make quick exits in order to change into Superman. This generates trust issues between the two and threatens to ruin their personal and professional relationship. While John Shea was great as the weakly villainous Lex Luthor, his removal from the main cast did leave the show with plenty of great opportunities to bring in some new and exciting villains each week. These villains include the famous Superman comic book villains like Metallo, Winslow Shot the Toyman, the Prankster, and the Intergang Crime Syndicate, as well as original villains who would go on to become Lois and Clark classics like Tempest, Lucky Leon, and Dr. Gretchen Kelly. Oh, and did I mention we finally see a bald Lex Luthor? By season 2, Lois and Clark's popularity had increased, and it had proven itself to be a show worthy for primetime television. As such, more and more respectable guest stars began to make appearances on the show. Bronson Pinchot, Peter Boyle, Bruce Campbell, Lane Davies, Charles Rocket, Sherman Hemsley and Isabel Sanford, Corey Everson, Brian Doyle Murray, and even Raquel Welch, just to name a few. I found it very hard to choose a top 3 from the 22 wonderful episodes of Season 2, but I've gone with the following. Episode 2, Wall of Sound, when bad boy musician Lenny Stoke threatens to destroy populated buildings in Metropolis by using sound waves unless the Citibank branches give him half of their assets. I found this episode interesting because of the way the villains are able to turn one of Superman's superpowers into a super weakness when they attack his sensitive hearing with a unique sound wave. From a Lois and Clark perspective, this is a juicy episode. Lois becomes jealous and insecure when Clark is nominated for a Kurth Award, and when Clark uses the idea of tracking down leads for their current assignments separately as an excuse to run off and change into Superman, Lois becomes very insecure, which causes a rift between the pair. Episode 18, Tempest Fugitive, where Lois and Clark must travel back to 1966 to save Superman as a baby. Now, as out there as this idea is, even for Superman, I actually really like it. Clark is approached by a man claiming to be late fiction writer H.G. Wells. Clark is quick to shrug it off as a gimmick, but when Wells tells Clark he knows that he's Superman and shows him his time machine, he proves himself to be the real deal. H.G. Wells is in search of gold, as it's the fuel he needs to get his time machine up and running again. Wells has with him a volunteer from the future named Tempest, played to perfection by Lane Davies, who Wells wants to use as proof to show people in his own time that he did indeed travel into the future. The situation quickly becomes chaotic when Tempest reveals he has his own agenda for coming back to the past. Tempest hates his utopian future that was brought about by Superman's descendants and wants to travel back to Smallville 1966 to kill Superman as a baby in an attempt to alter the future. Tempest is basically Lois and Clark's version of the whole Legion anti-superhero thing that the comic books had going on. And it's hysterical because being from the future, he knows as much about Superman as we the audience do, making him in on the whole Lois is so stupid for not realizing the two men in her life are the same person situation. Tempest was popular from the get-go, and therefore makes a return to the show in Season 3 and twice in Season 4, one of which is a two-parter storyline. And Episode 21, Wine, 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 where Superman is sued by an ungrateful deadbeat that accuses Superman of breaking his hand while saving him from a falling speaker. I found this to be a very interesting idea for the show, as it's a situation that can easily be related to everyday life. Having someone's best interest at heart only for it to come back and bite you is a feeling that most of us are familiar with. Now at the mercy of the courts, Superman must find a lawyer that he feels best represents his principles, and overlooks all the bloodthirsty lawyers in Metropolis to have the right lawyer on his case. It's great from the story and all, but let's be honest, in the real world he'd need to go with the ruthless lawyers. This episode also is a big milestone for Lois and Clark's relationship, which was great to see towards the end of the season. Season 3 of Lois and Clark brought some more changes, this time not in the cast, but in the direction that the show would be heading. Alright guys, here it is. Probably the biggest Lois and Clark spoiler coming up for the people that have not seen the show. So, here it is. In the opening of Season 3, Lois reveals to Clark and to us all that she has indeed figured out that Clark is Superman. Yes, after briefly finding out in Season 2's Tempest Fugitive before having her memory erased by time travel, this time Lois has figured out Clark's big secret on her own, dramatically changing her relationship with him. After the initial shock and concern of having another keeper of his secret, Clark does feel as though a weight has been lifted from his shoulders as he no longer has to lie to Lois about his whereabouts the way he did throughout Season 2. And Lois is now able to assist Clark in coming up with excuses for his quick exits and absences. Although the change of direction was refreshing at the time, I do feel that this is where the show started to lose its edge. For the first 2 seasons, the show was bombarded with fan mail wanting Lois and Clark to get together, and after putting it off for 2 years, it finally happened in Season 3, with Lois and Clark becoming not only a couple, but an engaged couple after a very bumpy start. The main issue with this was that now that the two of them were together and the fans had what they wanted, the show lost heat. Don't get me wrong, there are some great episodes and moments throughout Season 3, but to me, it just didn't have the same magic that we got in Season 2. Most of the villains are a lot less memorable in Season 3 than they were in Season 2, and what was shaping up to be the biggest new villain arc of Season 3 with the cunning and conniving Mindy Church, it didn't end up going anywhere. She was never even arrested for her crimes and just ended up disappearing from the show altogether. In fact, the most memorable villain of Season 3 is probably once again Lex Luthor, who breaks out of prison just in time to wreak havoc on Lois and Clark's wedding day. And armed with a new state-of-the-art weapon and the knowledge of Superman's identity, he's a bigger threat than ever. That being said, there are still some awesome new challenges for Superman, as he must take on New Age Nazis, a powerful magician out to get revenge on Clark, and for the first time in the series, Superman comes face to face with a villain of alien origin. My top 3 episodes for Season 3 are Episode 7, Ultra Woman, where an experiment with red kryptonite goes wrong and transfers Superman's powers to Lois. Following Clark's example and with his support, Lois asks Martha to create a costume for her to wear while using her superpowers. I love this episode because it forces Lois and Clark to walk in each other's shoes. Clark must adapt to living as a flesh and blood mortal, while Lois gets a first-hand experience in all the responsibilities and hardships that come with being a superhero. I love the idea that Lois gains a whole new love and appreciation for who Clark is by realizing that the hardest part of his life is not being able to be there for everyone who asks for his help. Plus, this episode features a villainous, superpowered Shelley Long, and well, who wouldn't pay to see that? Episode 11, Home is Where the Hurt Is, where a mutated strain of a Kryptonian virus found on baby Kal-El's ship leaves the Man of Steel bedridden and at death's door. This is Season 3's Christmas episode, and I found the idea of using a virus from Superman's home planet against him to be a very interesting idea. When Clark is ill, you can see the genuine concern of Lois, Martha, and Jonathan. They sell it brilliantly, and you can feel their emotions with them, and it is very moving. We are also reintroduced to Lois's parents in this episode, after being recast from their initial appearances in Season 1. Fun fact, that's Felice Coates, who played Lois in the first season of The Adventures of Superman in 1952. The late Beverly Garland and Harvey Presnell do a great job in bringing Lois's parents to life, and have great on-screen chemistry with each other. They would continue to play these roles up until the series final. And Episode 14, The Dad Who Came In From the Cold, where Jimmy's secret agent father comes to town, bringing a whole lot of trouble with him. I enjoyed this episode because it's the only time we get to see Jimmy's family element in the series. We get to see the use of modern spyware, well, for the 90s anyway, and we get a first-hand look at just how brilliant Jimmy is behind a keyboard. The episode focuses on the fact that Jimmy's dad had to lead a secret double life, which is something that Clark fears he will have to do with his children, and I thought that was an interesting avenue to explore. Lois and Clark's final season would end up being Season 4. After being had by the fake wedding in late season 3, Lois and Clark fans finally saw the title characters get hitched in the 3rd episode of season 4, Swear to God, This Time We're Not Kidding, which aired on October 6, 1996. It was the year of Superman's marriage in the comic book world as well, when DC Comics released Superman the Wedding album in December. What seemed like an improbable situation that the Superman universe fought off for so long was now a sure thing. Lois Lane was now Mrs. Clark Kent on the page and the screen. Although I didn't mind the idea of Superman having a mortal bride, a lot of die-hard Superman fans were against the idea, and Lois and Clark's ratings began to drop rapidly, being taken off primetime TV and put into a weekend time slot by the end of the 4th season. Although ratings were down, ABC did intend to have a 5th season of the show, but decided against it. This caught the producers and writers off guard, so the 4th season and the entire series ended on a cliffhanger episode. The cliffhanger wasn't a terrible way for the show to wrap on, but it did mean that Lois and Clark fans were not given a grand finale to the show that they had invested the last 4 years of their lives in, and was seen as a disappointment. While I do think that the series final could and would have been more memorable if the creators had have known that there would be no 5th season, I do think that the series could have ended on a much worse note than it did, as the cliffhanger is a positive one and not a negative one. If it had have been the cliffhanger at the end of Season 3, for example, that would have made it even worse. Season 4 is a bit of a mixed bag of highs and lows. I feel it's a stronger season than Season 3 was, but it still couldn't recapture the magic of Season 1 and Season 2. I'll give notable mentions to David Doyle as Mike, who would marry Lois and Clark and sadly pass away only several months later, and Drew Carey and Kathy Kinney, who were co-stars of The Drew Carey Show at the time, make a special appearance together in the episode Ghosts. Season 4 is best known for having more multi-episode story arcs than the previous seasons. The season begins with a two-parter with Lord of the Flies and Battleground Earth. We have another two-parter with episode 6, The People vs. Lois Lane, and episode 7, Dead Lois Walking. In the second half of the season, Tempest returns in his own two-parter, Meet John Doe and Lois and Clark's, episodes 14 and 15. From episode 17 to episode 19, we have a 3-episode arc where Lois and Clark come up against Lex Luthor Jr. And of course, the series final, The Family Hour, as mentioned, is a story that would have carried over into the Season 5 premiere if it had have gone ahead. My top 3 episodes for Season 4 are as follows. Episode 5, Brutal Youth, where a doctor gives an elderly prison escapee his youth back by stealing it from Jimmy Olsen. I found this episode enlightening because it deals with Superman's mortality. Now that Lois and Clark are a married couple, Lois expresses great concern when Dr. Klein reveals that Superman's dense molecular structure slows his aging process, and so Lois realizes that one day she will be an old lady while Clark will still be in his prime. It's a very interesting complication to throw into an already complex Lois and Clark relationship. I have to give an honourable mention to the late great Jack Larson here as well, who many Superman fans will know as Jimmy Olsen from the original Adventures of Superman series starring George Reeves and Noel Neill. Jack makes a special guest appearance as Jimmy as an old man, and it's a very special moment when we see Jack back in the role that he would become known for his entire life. Episode 10, Stop the Presses, where brothers Eric and Ethan Press look to kill Superman by draining him of his energy reserves. I found this episode interesting because it explores how Superman's body and superpowers actually work. The Press boys figure out that Superman's body is charged up by the sun like one big solar battery, and so killing him is a possibility if they could only drain his power like a battery and then keep him out of the sun, thus not giving him an opportunity to restore himself. There is also great husband and wife friction in this episode between Lois and Clark. When Perry White is promoted to a position upstairs, he chooses to appoint Lois the new editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet, causing friction between her and Clark. And episode 13, Sex, Lies and Videotape, where Lois, Clark, and Superman end up in a sex scandal which makes the front page of every newspaper in town. I found this episode to be very juicy as it deals with the complications Lois and Clark face of having a marriage that involves 3 people. When a snitch working for a metropolitan businessman, Randy Good, takes a photo of Clark making out with Lois as Superman, the story blows up all over the world as the people of Earth are left to believe that Superman is having an affair with a married woman. This leaves Lois and Clark in a very sticky situation as they realize that coming clean about Superman's identity might be the only way out of this mess. And even if they do reveal Clark and Superman are one and the same, will the world ever trust Superman again after he had kept his identity secret for so long? As I draw to a close to this retrospective, there are a few things I'd like to discuss. First up is the tone of the series. In today's world of DC comic book TV series, and even the New Age Superman films, there is a very dark and serious tone to them. This is a trend that seemed to start with Smallville, as the first half of the series was colourful, and by the end of the series the tone was a lot darker. This has become the norm in today's world of content under this genre. However, in the 1990s, that wasn't the case. People were still invested in the colourful and campy nature that was the trend in the 1980s. Dark interpretations of pop culture icons were not well received during this time. Timothy Dalton was panned at the time for the darker tone that his James Bond took, and so was the 1992's Batman Returns movie, which was criticised for being much darker than the first Batman film in 1989. Lois and Clark is full of colour, and although some of the dialogue and storylines may seem incredibly campy for today's TV shows, it was the expected and appreciated thing back in the 90s. And because Lois and Clark, along with the Christopher Reeve films, were my introduction to Superman, it's still my preferred way to watch the Man of Steel on the screen. The music for Lois and Clark was composed by Jay Gruska, who has since gone on to compose the music for Supernatural. For a 90s TV show, the music is passable. It's far from John Williams' work on the Superman films, and there are certainly tracks throughout the show that have not aged particularly well, but there are still some enjoyable listening material throughout the series. The Lois and Clark soundtrack was released on CD in 1997 and features some of the more frequent tracks used throughout the series. Notable mentions include Lois and Clark Courting, Clark in the Country, Superman Flies Home, and Tempest. Although there are 21 tracks on the disc, there are plenty of other scores from the show that were never released. I don't think there's been a re-release of the soundtrack, and it's likely there never will be. Copies of the CD are hard to come by, but you can find them from time to time on places like eBay and Amazon. Budgets for TV shows in the 90s were not like they are today. Lois and Clark had to tell intriguing stories with a restricted budget. Unlike other versions of Superman, where the Man of Steel constantly has to battle superpower mutants or extraterrestrials, Lois and Clark Superman spends the majority of his time on cunning and conniving everyday human beings that commit their crimes for their own benefit and greed. There is the occasional episode where Superman has to take on someone with unusual abilities, but most of his rivals throughout the show are flesh and blood human beings who want him out of their way. Another factor to consider with the limited budget is how it affects the quality of the special effects. While the special effects used in Lois and Clark did improve over time, they still look incredibly dated by today's standards. And that's not an attack on the creators of the show, it's simply what they could do with what they had at their disposal at the time. Primitive special effects are not something that usually bothers me while watching this kind of content. And while Lois and Clark is no exception of that, there are certain effects used that just can't be taken seriously. In comparison to other shows of the time under the same genre, like Hercules and Xena, the effects seem to be pretty much on par most of the time. But during Season 1 especially, some of the special effects just didn't quite hit the mark. As I mentioned before, Lois and Clark really focuses on Clark more than Superman. Because of this, it is demonstrated throughout the show that Clark is the good man that he is because he was fortunate enough to have been found and raised by Jonathan and Martha Kent. They are his only parental figures and are the ones that raised him the right way to become a force for the greater good. The 1990s seemed to be the decade for Jonathan Kent, as before then the character had always passed away in Clark's youth, and this is a trend that has seemed to recommence with the 21st century. In the 90s, however, Jonathan was fortunate enough to survive and see what adult Clark would become, both in live action and animation. If you're used to and are a fan of Kryptonian mythology like crystals, the Fortress of Solitude, and Kal-El being educated by Jor-El, this might not be the interpretation of Superman for you. Clark's Kryptonian origins are only briefly touched on in the series. In the Season 1 episode Foundling, Clark and Lex both come into contact with a palm-sized globe that is a map of Earth and Krypton while holding recorded messages about who Clark is and why he had to be sent to Earth. The Fortress of Solitude is nothing more than Clark's childhood clubhouse, something that Smallville would adopt before introducing the real thing in Season 5. We do briefly meet other Kryptonians during the cliffhanger from Season 3 into Season 4, but it's a far different kind of Kryptonian than we see in other media. So who is suited to Lois and Clark? Well, I'd say that any Superman fans can get enjoyment from the show, but in particular, if you're a Superman fan that wants to see the most sexy version of Lois and Clark to date, then this is the show for you. I'd also recommend this show to anyone who wants to see Superman focus more on his life as a human rather than a superhero. There are layers to the character of Clark Kent in this series that we have not seen before, both personally and professionally. We really get a good look at the kind of man Clark is when he isn't reporting the news or saving the day. And that's another thing I like about this show, is that we actually see Clark working as a reporter alongside Lois. Christopher Reeve is still Superman and always will be. And as great as his Clark Kent was, we never really got to see him being a reporter at work. I guess that's just what happens when you have to squeeze the story of Superman into 2-hour movies instead of 4 years worth of television. Lois and Clark is one of the great love stories of the 1990s. So for anyone out there, Superman fan or not, who loves iconic 90s couples like Niles and Daphne, Ross and Rachel, and Doug and Carol, then you will get some enjoyment out of this series. It's a charming little show that has left its mark on the Superman universe. Lois and Clark isn't so much about the episodes, it's about the moments. Moments of joy, sorrow, love, hate, and above all else, magic. The show is full of magic and full of moments that are memorable for those who watch it. I consider it a fine addition to the world of Superman and would recommend it to anyone who hasn't had a good look at it. Thanks for watching.